Thank you. Well, I'm filling in for someone who didn't show up, and Piero was a little worried that he came to the talk that I gave a couple weeks ago. He was a little worried that it wasn't an exciting enough title, so he suggested this title for me, and I added the probably to it. The original title to the talk that I gave a couple weeks ago was Exploring the Future of Social Messes. I've just finished, pretty much finished with a book called The Little Book of Social Messes. And I've been working for the last 15 years on the edges of the kinds of problems that are very hard to solve. My talk is going to be in 3 parts. First, I'm going to give you a very quick overview of social messes and the studies that have been done in the last 15, 20 years of them. Then I'm going to point to the beginning, and this is part of the title of using the word exploring social messes, because I think we have as a global society an increasing number of what I call mega messes, and so I want to just introduce that, and finally, since that's kind of a worrisome topic, I want to talk a little bit about what the good news is about social messes. Okay, so part 1 is a quick review, and in the late 70s, an organizational development specialist at the University of Pennsylvania named Russell Acoff, who's a systems analyst and organizational person, said, I'm running into something which is more than just an ordinary problem. And they're increasingly integrated, systemically integrated set of problems that are all linked to each other. He says, and the English language doesn't really have a word for that. So maybe we could call it a mess. So, and that has kind of caught on. At least at least I like it. There. What is a better way to look at messes is to think about what are some of the characteristics of messes. I'm wondering if somebody could just give me a glass of water. I forgot to get one. That I'd really appreciate. These are some of the characteristics which you don't have to have all of them to have a mess, but many messes have many of them. And this is only the first half of the list. These are also characteristics, thank you, of messes. So I'm sure that some of you will recognize that you run into something like this once in a while. They're also what?
I wasn't done looking at your other one.
All right. See, I learned the back thing. So all right, there you go. The next list is even longer. They've also been called wicked problems, to distinguish them from the ordinary kind of problems that we solve every day in engineering and mathematics. The answers are in the back of the textbook when we used to have textbooks, or are now applicable. But an urban specialist named Horst Riddle, who's the primary author on this, wrote a paper went back in the 70s when there was a lot of urban redesign, and he ran into all these kinds of characteristics in trying to figure out how to deal with urban design. I use a different set of characteristics, which I call the multi-multis. And any one of the kind of messes that we deal with have multiple debates, multiple perspectives, multiple leaders. Often nobody's in charge, particularly the global kinds of questions that we're talking about, and so on. These are all ones that you will try to get rid of, but you can't get rid of. Of course, complexity is one of the issues, and the sciences have dealt with complexity over the years, increasing complexity. This, I'm told, is a diagram of how we create and use energy in the human body. And it was over, I'm told, again, not a historian of science, but people say that 20,000 biologists worked for 40 years to create this diagram. And that's only the top half of it. And we're increasingly complexifying our world. Just last week or 2 weeks ago, all the doctor's offices have to categorize the illness that you come in with into 17,000 different codes. But then that was increased to 140,000 of them. And this was an attempt by some people at the University of Illinois to attempt to visualize and categorize these different kinds of codes. So the emphasis here is that there are certain things that we deal with, most of us deal with every day, called problems, and they have different kinds of characteristics. They're usually fixable. They usually have solutions, and you'll notice that they're different from the kinds of things that I was calling messes just now. I repeat the definition, although I've added a little recursiveness to Akoff's definition, because often social messes are related to other social messes. For example, here's one that I often use as an example. People will say, well, we've got a drug problem in this country. Well, we've got a drug problem that's connected to an inner city problem that's connected to our international relations with Mexico and Colombia and Afghanistan and so forth. So it is very hard to address a single problem at once. And in fact, it's hard to when you start recognizing that there is such a thing as names, as messes, it's hard to name a mess. So I called one the inner city drug war, drug gangs, dropout rate, unemployment, prison guards, Mexico, Colombia, Afghanistan mess. In Germany, at Berlin at a conference, and I got a really big laugh because they thought I was starting to make a German word out of this. So the lesson of this very first part of my talk is we don't treat social messes like a regular problem. I've used a process with some task forces, mostly at the level of county governance, about 6 or 7 projects, where I use a visual process called mess mapping. And I get a task force, which has been assigned by the county commissioners usually, to sit down and make visual, verbal pictures of the mess itself. Looks like something like that when it's finished, although as you might imagine, it might take several half-day sessions of a task force to create something like this. But the bright yellow boxes are statements of the problem. And remember that Akoff suggested that that a mess is an interrelated set of problems, a systemically interrelated set. So the first step, if you're going to work with a task force who's dealing with a mess, is get them to describe what how they see the different set of problems. Well, each of the problems is set in a blob. That's another technical term that you'll just have to get used to. And the blobs are different sectors or different organizations in the county. And one of the important things that people found in these mess mapping processes, as they sat together and around 4 or 5 people out of a 4 or 5 people at each table of, let's say, a 20 or 25 person task force, they learned to listen to each other a lot better. They learned that I'm causing your problem and you're causing my problem, and we attempted to describe that on the map with the arrows. So one of the things I've done in the book that I've written is done a whole chapter on how you do this, how you make these kind of things, and how you run task forces like this. But the point is that you use the visual process plus a facilitated group process in order to come up with the mess mapping solution. And then the contributions that this process makes that is a little different than some other of these kinds of organizations that work on problems like on messes like this. For one thing, we're using a visual mess, and when you get people focused on making one of these together, they forget that they're often in conflict with each other because they're trying to cooperate to make the best possible. Also, it turns out that if I walk into a task force and say that the good news is you don't have a problem, but the real news is you have a mess, actually people think, oh, I can relax. It sounds like we don't have to, that we're not going to make a lot of progress really fast, but we're going to learn a lot about what this is and maybe then make the progress. One of the other things, I won't go through all of these because it's a whole lecture in itself, but one of the interesting things that has come out of one of the interesting questions that came out of the group process of making these is the question not of what's causing this, but what's holding the mess in place? What's holding this problem in place? A different look, a different kind of a look at causality. There, part 2. How am I doing on time? I'm all right with time. Okay, so I think one of the other things that has issues that has come up for me, because I've worked with several large international task forces on sustainability and climate change and issues like that. Also one on pandemics. That our wonderful innovation capacity, which is centered often in Silicon Valley here, some of the technologies that we're creating are also creating real governance messes for us, and we're creating those faster than governance can keep up. What are some of these megamessages that I call them megamessages? Well, this is kind of interesting. I thought here are 4 that have been around for a while. Can the person in the back see the timeline? This is 1950. This is before 1950. This is 2010. And then the present. So some of the mega messes that we're dealing with have been around for a long time, have been growing and growing, and we haven't solved them. You can ask yourself, how long might they be going on? And you might also ask, what are some of the recent mega messes that our technology is producing? Here are several. And as I ask myself, not in just an impressionistic way, when did we begin to hear about these? When did these start to become really messes instead of little irritating issues? Well, it seems like most of them started after World War II. That is, so there are emerging technologies. Again, we can ask ourselves, what are we going to do in a governance way with these kinds of messes? How are we going to address them? At what level? National, international, local, biology, in the lab? I think at all of these levels, and I think that we need to begin to learn a learning process in all of our sciences, technologies, social sciences. It's a real challenge for universities as well as society and governments around the world. Let's put those two previous slides together. And I remind you that each one of these mega messes has or partakes of what I'm calling the multi-multis. So one of the projects that I worked on that I began to think was in 2008 was with the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, an organization of 200 of the biggest companies in the world who are the headquarters of this organization. It is in Geneva, and it's made up of the CEOs of these 200 largest corporations. And we had a project called Vision 2050 where we tried to think about what kind of a relatively decent, successful world would be like in 2050, and then used a process called backcasting, which is to ask if we have a picture of the vision that we want, what has to be in place in each of the decades back to now? In each one of those trails. Well, this happens to be a mural. So part of my job was to help create that, but then create a mural where you could communicate that. Ooh, okay. I just got the 2-minute signal. All right, I'm going to rush. In any case, one of the ways that I think that we begin to help to understand the mega messes is to use multiple murals like this, from portraying different aspects of the mega mess. Just to zoom down quickly into that, but then I wanted you to see at least a list of what I think are some of the major emerging technologies that are going to be producing mega messes for us before our governance processes will catch up with them. The ones that are, I think, most worrying are the biology ones. What's the good news? I didn't want to miss the good news. Just with 1 minute to go, because of the flashlight. Well, to be able to frame something different than to think what we're going to deal with is just a little ordinary problem that we just get together and think about the solution and two options or three options and go at it is not going to do these kinds of megamessages. We've got some new names for these, which is useful to have. The one that I like is unruly complexity. Next to social messes, I like social messes because the social gives the sense that we're creating these messes, these mega messes all together. We're all cooperating to create them. We've got a bunch of new methods and tools. You'll recognize some of them. One of them that I talked about tonight, the one that I worked on, is mess mapping. And there's an increasing group of people who are now thinking about these. And there are several books that are out, and mine will be out soon. So people are beginning to think about it, but I think we've got to do this at all different levels of the world. One of the encouraging things was that a professor at NYU named Jay Rosen gave a keynote speech a couple of years to a bunch of journalists in the UK, which had to do with how would journalism cover mega messes or wicked problems. And these were the list of suggestions that he thought would add to being covered. And I've started to talk to a number of journalists here in the city about how do we, if it's a cooperative thing, then how do we get going in the cooperation part of it. I think the one thing that's missing there is how do you show the cumulative stuff, which I think one has to do with visualization to a large extent, like the murals that I showed you briefly in the World Business Council project. And there I did it in 20 minutes. Yes.
Because now I'm confused what is a problem. Because in our age, with increasing complexity,
Yeah.
and then the digital thing increases the speed at which change occurs.
Mm-hmm.
What is not a mess?
What is not a mess?
What is not a mess?
Well, actually, you agree with a colleague of mine in Australia who thinks that just about every communication problem is a mess. It partake every beyond ordering a hamburger or something. Almost all of the issues that we're faced with are the multi-multis, and we're going to have to learn how to do this. We have to get. It's really it's one of the challenges of the century.
Question back there.
So, there's a human tendency to try to look for simple, crisp solutions to problems. Do you think that is a confounding theme, that makes it harder for people to perceive and to address messes, or do you see that potentially helping drive people towards trying to actually cut through a mess to get to valuable solutions?
I think both. I think that for some people will stamp their foot and say, I want a simple solution here. And we see an awful lot of simple solutions on television in our political realm these days. And on the other, and that tendency in human beings to simplify, which is what our science tries to do. We try to, our models are simplifications of reality. We try. I think that this has served our cognitive brains pretty well up to now, and I think we need to be thinking about, as the small part of this that I've been working on is, besides working with some of these small to medium-sized problems in groups, is the visualization problem. Because I think that one of the things that in Africa when we were evolving into being sapiens, we had the capacity of looking around above the tall grass and seeing if there was any danger. And I think that the information murals that I and others have been working on enable us to provide that kind of context conceptually, and to maybe enable over time with the right kind of computing assistance, like a screen that would cover this whole wall and be interactive, which there are now this year. So that we can change and modify our models and so forth, and be able to put. I gave a lecture at one of these at the University of Illinois. I had 20 little thumbnails of my murals over at one corner, and I could hit one and go whoosh, and it would cover the whole screen, just like you do on your phone. So that the whole decision-making group could look at it and say, but let's look at that other view. Click, whoosh, you see. And you can walk, and people do that, walk over, look at it closely, look at the detail, as well as the big picture. Sorry, that's kind of a long answer. But,
do you have some of these murals, are they sitting on walls?
Yes.
As you can see.
There's, the Tides Foundation building in the Presidio. There's a restaurant called RX. The mural that I showed you is on the wall there, has been for several years. And the one I did for the UK Radioactive Waste Agency is in its cafeteria, 15-foot wall. You notice that I use visual verbal language in it. There's a lot of text as well as a lot of visualization. So it's a screwy new kind of art too.
Is this projecting an unwillingness to use the word chaos?
Some people feel that way, and sometimes have used that, and it has some technical terms, of course, as well. I prefer not to use it.
Is there any analogy to like thermodynamics? Could there be entropy?
No, you'd have to tell me that. I'm a mere
That's the reason I asked the question.
I'm a mere artist and social scientist. Yeah, you have one.
Yeah, Robert, when you are interfacing with these groups and, sorting out the mess, are you graphically creating graphics like on a whiteboard while people are talking, illustrating what they're talking about, or does the graphic translation come later?
So kind of a combination of that. Sometimes I have worked on a large piece of paper on a wall, as my friend David Sibbett does. But I've usually tried to get the small groups of not more than 4 or 5 people and a big piece of paper on the table, and them to scribble on it. Then we take it away, put it through the computer, come back and say, did we hear you right? And then they say, oh, no, and oh, we forgot this, and so we build this up over time that way. And I filter it through some, I use if we're addressing a systemic set of problems, then I use yellow boxes. They don't think about yellow boxes, but I think about them, and I think about what the connections are and so forth, and they help with that. Yeah, one back there.
In this concept of backcasting,
Yes?
in addition to mapping out and doing the blobs and showing the messes, have you backcasted on specific problems and actually been able to focus on a certain prioritizing of this is the first thing we should look at, and then if we did that, we could go back, and then this would be the next thing? I mean, is this
That's how that was done. There were 10 tracks there. There was energy and forestry and manufacturing and mobility, transportation, and so forth. Each one of those horizontal tracks. And the company strategists that I was working with did that for each one of those. Now, they could have, we didn't have the time to then interrelate those, but they said we didn't need that for now because what they needed was a rough view of what were the requirements in each one of the decades. And they could take that back, and then the company could go ahead and respond to that.
Thank you very much.